Well, let's talk about the franchise itself and you attracting the right kind of people for your culture. Garrett, who's your ideal franchise owner?
Yeah, that's a very easy question at this point. I would say that would have been a harder question to answer about a year ago. We grade on core values first, meaning like if I recruit Frank in Tampa, the first question I'm asking in my head is like, do I think Frank has what it takes from a core value perspective? Like, how closely does he align with us
Hmm.
on the mission of serving in Tampa? It's like, I'm not going to be in Tampa. So it's like, I got to make sure he has the right lens to do things in a way that would represent this brand well. And it's like first is like assessing values at the end of the day. And so again, our values are like, do you give first? Like what's the evidence of that in the past, right? Another mantra of ours is be the expert. Like how embedded are you in your thing? Like, is there a track record of you growing? So for example, like in the corporate world, we look at individuals of like, have you tracked through? So like if you're on the marketing side, have you gone from marketing coordinator to marketing manager to marketing director or anything like that? Like, are you moving up the ladder because you're becoming more of an expert at your craft, if you will? And so we can really grade in the beginning on values at the end of the day, because it's like there's so many rules out. Like you can't run a company on rules. Like it's just impossible. Like but you can run one with a framework, which those frameworks are just values at the end of the day. And that's how I can trust and know that, whether it's Frank in Florida or it's Brittany in New York, like they're going to operate with the right lens, the appropriate lens to make things happen.
Hmm.
So that's first and foremost what we look for is like, do you have an alignment with our values in our systems at the end of the day? But then, some of the subcomponents of that are going to be like, hey, are you going to come in and just own this thing? As in like, are you going to be on the boots in the ground running with it and learning it? Entrepreneurship is hard at the end of the day. Like
Sure.
anyone that's listening to this right now, like it is very difficult. If you've never done it, like it will test you for sure. It will test your fortitude in whatever you do. Like it doesn't matter if it's a cryo business or a law firm or whatever. There are hard things in all businesses
Agree.
at the end of the day. And so when you have hard things, then it makes it that much easier when you have those hard moments to say, at least I like what I'm doing at the end of the day. And so a core component of ours is like, are you absolutely passionate about this? Because there's so many ways to make money out there. So many ways, right? You could open a dog wash place. You could open a car place. You could open, again, a law firm. And so it's like, what's the why beyond money? It's like,
Hmm.
look, we're going to obviously help you with that component. That's important. Like, we can't serve people if like you can't keep the doors open. So that's a core value of ours, right? We want to help people. So money is important, but like, is it the primary driver? If it's the primary driver, you're going to lose at the end of the day because they're going to have hard days. You're going to want to quit, whereas you're not going to want to quit when it's beyond the money. And so behind the values is obviously assessing like, why are you looking at wellness? What makes you passionate about this? Was there something that happened in your life? Is it because you saw someone else transform? Like why this? Like out of anything, you could
Hmm.
open a burger place for anything. And so we keep getting a little bit granular from there of like, so passions, core values. And then again, like we're not going to, so obviously if you love it, you're going to be in it and want to learn it. So in other words, we don't do, absentee owners or anything like that. It's like, I
Sure.
want you on the boots, on the ground running. Now, that doesn't mean you're buying a job. That just means in the beginning, I need you to learn all of it, A to Z. So like, and the only way you can do that is actually doing it. So we have a minimum requirement of like, you got to be in the store for a minimum of the first 6 months at a minimum before you can bring in a manager or anything like that.
Okay.
It's
Yep.
because
Hands on.
you can't lead that manager if like how can you do a good job if you're like, I have no idea, I have no idea about this business. And so they honestly all tie together ultimately. But I want to be in there running
Hmm.
values at the end of the day
Cool.
are the big things we look at.
And and you guys are growing. So, granted, we only have two franchises open as of the time of recording this here in both Boise, Idaho, and Chandler, which is Phoenix. But I understand you've got 9 in development with 30 awarded in the next 3 years because, as you mentioned, the key expansion model for you is through multi-unit franchise operators, right? So everybody but one is a multi-unit franchise operator. So is that a
Yeah.
requirement now moving forward as you open new locations, or is it really based on the territory?
So it's not a requirement, but it's a logical decision for both parties.
Hmm.
If it makes sense. And so it has made sense for 90% of our franchisees that have come on board. So we asked the question, right? We said, hey, franchisee in, let's call it Tampa, right? I'll use that example. This is clearly an area with, adjacent markets and adjacent territories where it makes sense to expand. You're looking at a brand new brand such as us. Therefore, you are taking on elevated amounts of risk by doing so versus like another brand that has 100 plus, 200 plus locations open or whatever. Like they just got more depth. They just have more time under the bar at the end of the
Sure.
day. And so if you are wanting to take on more risk, we want to be able to give you more reward in return. And so the only way I can de-risk it for you is, hey, let's partner together. I will, obviously, we're setting aside territories for you. Obviously, I'm taking in those initial franchise fees on the front end for a multi-unit purpose, but then I can go build you a better mousetrap for you to actually win at a local level, right? So I can go invest that in custom dashboards. I can go invest that in custom software solutions. I can invest that in people that make your job easier at the end of the day. So it's honestly just a value exchange. And again, we look at,
Absolutely.
obviously, we work with Fran Fund, for example, and anyone that is trying to franchise. Fran Fund is a fantastic to like hand your candidates to evaluate. No, they don't pay me or anything like that. They just have been really good. But like they report back to us and we get a look and say, hey, like, yeah, Sally up in Minneapolis or whatever, like financially, it would make sense for her. And so it's like, you either shouldn't do this at all because you don't buy into the brand. That's fine. Like if it's too much risk for you, don't. But like you're in a good position where it's like we can mutually partner together. I'll set aside these 3 for you because it's super early, but in exchange, and obviously like you have more upside in the future as a result of that. But then also I get to de-risk it for you because like, again, I don't need the cash, but like I can just build you something better with more cash and more capital. So it's honestly just a value exchange. And that's why it's been 90% of the time it's made sense. But again, in those 10% cases, like one is in St. George, Utah, for example. Geographically, if you've never been to St. George, it's just like it vanishes into nothing after like you leave that town. So there's like nothing for like another 3 hours, right? It's not a big market like Salt Lake City or whatever, right? So it didn't make sense for that individual. And so that's kind of how we assess multi-unit. It's like it's ideal for both parties, but like not really. That makes sense.
Okay. Garrett, what's the investment range to open one unit?
Yeah. So as you know, totally varies on the market.
Sure.
You're looking at like Houston, Texas, for example. You're going to come in probably around 650 to 700. LA market, about $1 million. Build outs are crazy. And that the majority of that cost is build outs. The second line item in there is going to be equipment. So all the equipment that's housed in all the rooms. And the biggest variance on, if it's super high or super low has to do with the real estate, right? So to build out a 2,200 square foot space versus like a 2,800 square foot space, which is just totally dependent on what's out there, like it will cost more inevitably just to open a 2,800 square foot space. There's more build out materials. There's more rooms to fill with equipment, etc. So some of it depends massively on what site ends up being out there.
Sure.
That's obviously a bottleneck. So
the ideal footprint size is the 2,200 to 2,800 range then?
Yeah. So ideal footprint is really between about 1,900 square feet at the lowest side if it's a rectangle, all the way up to about 2,700 square feet. And again, we'll work it out on like if there's a golden goose, right? That's in an amazing spot at like 2,800 or 2,900. So, but yeah, that's the general range for the concept size.
One of my favorite questions I ask every guest, I think, is no matter how long they've been in franchising, it's like, what has been your biggest surprise since franchising? You've been doing it for a little more than a year now, I guess. So what's been your biggest surprise since franchising for a little over a year?
I said earlier in the podcast, we said, hey, it would be unethical for us to not share this with people. And again, it's what got us over the hump. And we're like, we know this is going to be hard. And so it's like, I took in the idea of, we know this is going to be hard. I will say, I think we have made it even harder because we got to learn a big lesson along the way, which is like, the role of the CEO is ultimately to bring people on, which I did not understand earlier. I bring on the people and the people build the business. And I didn't understand that concept for a very long period of time. And so it was me ramming my head and to try to make things happen. And so it's like up until even recently, as we brought on new people and whatnot to grow the opportunity, to grow the system and whatnot, there was definitely a lot of hard moments of like, you're in 16 different places and whatnot. And that's my own fault. I think unfortunately, I got to take on mentors that, they got to point to me and be like, Garrett, like you're missing the ball here. It's like, you have this capital to like invest in people. Like that's your job. Like go invest. Like the challenge is in entrepreneurship, you're constantly unlearning things that reinforce you to be successful earlier. Right. So in the beginning it was like, I have to do everything. I have to learn how to market. I have to sell. I have to retain customers. I got to be in the store. And then at night, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. You learn that lesson. You're like, oh, that got me there. But to get to the next level, it's like, whoa. That's not what it's going to take. You got to actually back up and say, maybe I should listen to the people that are in front of me.
Right.
I've been there and done it. And all telling me people, like you need people. And it's like, And so the biggest lesson in franchising for me this far is like, get more people on your team, build the people even ahead of what you anticipate.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.